Hello, my name is Allyson Palmer. I'm delighted to be speaking to you today about an exceptional group of individuals, centenarians. In other words, people who live to be 100 years or older, and what we have learned from these individuals about healthy aging. I am a current internal medicine resident at Mayo Clinic, and during medical school, I completed a PhD in the biology of aging. I plan to become a geriatrician following residency. Therefore, as you may imagine, I have a particular interest in healthy aging. I plan to spend my career as a physician scientist helping people live healthier lives for longer. So let's jump into it. Here's what I plan to cover during today's session. We'll first discuss what a centenarian is and what characteristics have been observed in this group of individuals. We'll talk about human lifespan and how it has and hasn't changed over the past century. I'll explain why I think it is important to focus on a concept called health span rather than lifespan. I'll share some basic concepts and current directions of translational science work in aging. And finally, we'll end with some practical advice from centenarians themselves. So let's start with some definitions. What is a centenarian and a supercentenarian? So a centenarian is an individual who is 100 years of age or older, and the prevalence of centenarians in the population worldwide is 1 per 6,000 individuals. A supercentenarian is someone who is 110 years of age or older, and these individuals are more rare, 1 in 5 million. So just a visual representation. This is the population of the United States in 2015, 313 million people. Centenarians were 70,000 people. And at that time, there were only 17 living supercentenarians in the United States. So they're very rare. Worldwide, the United States has the most centenarians, but per capita, Japan and Italy actually have more centenarians than the United States. And why do we study centenarians? Why are we interested in them? They age particularly well. Centenarians tend to be in good physical condition until the end of their life. If they develop disease or disability, it tends to be much later than their peers, on average at 93 years of age. And when we look at these individuals, there tend to be 3 different patterns of superagers. The first are the escapers. These are the most rare, making up only about 15%. These individuals have no clinically demonstrable disease at the end of life at 100 years of age. So they've made it to the end of that 100 years without developing any disease at all. Delayers make up about 43%. These folks do develop disease, but not until later in life, around the age of 80. And the survivors, which make up about 42%, are individuals who develop disease at a typical time in their 50s or 60s, but fare very well and still live to be the age of 100. I wanted to give you a few examples of supercentenarians. So this is Dr. Denmark and Dr. Engelman, both pictured here at the age of 103. They were both supercentenarians, so lived to be over 110. But at the age of 103, they were both practicing medicine still. And this is Mr. Khan. He was Wall Street's oldest professional. At the age of 109, he was still working at the $1 billion trading company he had founded. So thinking about lifespan and taking it from a population standpoint, it appears when we look at population data that there may be a limit to human lifespan. This graph shows the average and maximum lifespan over time from 1851, which is the solid line on the left, to 2011, which is this dotted line, and projecting out to 2031. On the y-axis is the proportion of the population who is surviving at each age, which is depicted on the x-axis here on the bottom. So if we use the 50% mark to indicate the average lifespan during each of these times, we can see that the average lifespan back in 1851 was less than 50 years old. The average lifespan then increased over time quite dramatically, likely owing in part to sanitation, vaccination, and other public health measures, as well as a decrease in infant mortality. However, the maximum observed lifespan did not significantly increase over the same time period. It has remained relatively unchanged. Some scholars have suggested that this may mean there is an upper limit of human lifespan above which we will not likely exceed. The centenarian population, due to this increase in the median lifespan, is expected to grow quite rapidly, actually, over the next few decades. So in 2015, worldwide, there are about 450,000 centenarians. It's projected that by 2050, there would be over 3 million. So this is a growing population. When we think about longevity, what is the record of human longevity? What is the top age that anyone has reached? We think that this prize goes to Jean Clément, who lived in France and died at the age of 122. A close second is Mr. Kimura, who lived in Japan and died in 2013 at the age of 116. When we look at families, it seems that longevity does run in families. So this graph is from a study of centenarians from Massachusetts, comparing the siblings of centenarians versus the siblings of another group of people who died in their 70s. These bars are showing the risk ratio or increased odds of survival in siblings of centenarians versus siblings of normal longevity individuals. A higher number or a higher bar confers a higher probability of survival, and a value of approximately 1 would mean an equal probability of survival between the two groups. So when comparing these two groups of siblings, the odds of living to age 60 to 80 was the same between the two groups. However, siblings of centenarians were 3 to 4 times as likely to live to age 80 to 100. This indicates that there must be a genetic component to exceptional longevity, rather than being due to lifestyle alone, for example. Another line of evidence that there may be a genetic component to longevity is that even the offspring of centenarians tend to have a lower risk of chronic diseases and a longer lifespan. So the offspring of centenarians develop less cancer, heart attacks, and stroke, and live on average 8 to 14 years longer than their peers. This is a family photo of the same banker that I showed you a couple slides back with his siblings. So his family was one in which longevity seems to run in the family. This is a photo of the 4 siblings when they were young, and then a recreation later in life. All 4 of these individuals lived to be centenarians. They all lived to be 100 years old. So if we think there's a genetic component to longevity, what genes are involved? There have been many studies trying to answer that question, and scientists have explored and analyzed the entire genome. This graph was generated from one such study, and several genes were identified to be closely associated with longevity. However, further study of these genes has not yielded definitive evidence that any one gene causes longevity. Therefore, more work needs to be done in this area. It does seem that the interaction between multiple genes may be more responsible for living longer. While I've just shown you that there is a significant genetic component to exceptional longevity, we've also learned from twin studies in twins, that the only approximately 25% of variance in adult lifespan can be attributed to genetic differences between individuals. Therefore, it seems that behavior, environment, and health practices can also have a large impact. However, when we speak to supercentenarians, or those individuals who live to be over 110, there did not seem to be any particular factor in terms of lifestyle that accounts for their longevity. Similarly, no particular demographic factor. So supercentenarians said that they had the same amount of smoking, they had the same diet physical activity level, and alcohol use as the general population. So we can't point to anything in particular. And similarly, as I mentioned, it doesn't seem that education, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, or religion can predict who will reach 100. We've learned from epidemiologic studies that there are particularly long-lived populations of people around the world. For example, the Loma Linda Seventh-day Adventists on the West Coast have an exceptionally long life expectancy, 88 for men and 89 for women, which is more than the general population. Their culture tends to include vegetarianism. They're non-smokers, they exercise regularly and spend a lot of time with their family and their church. And when we look at them biologically and take their blood, we notice that they have lower levels of stress hormones than their fellow citizens. So these are the factors that we've noticed in this population. Another long-lived population is the folks who live in Okinawa, Japan. And they follow a mantra of hara hasibu, which means eat until you're only 80% full. They eat a very variable diet with lots of fruits and vegetables, and they eat soy as their main protein. And due to this, they tend to have low BMI. It's thought that maybe their exceptional longevity is in part due to the calorie restriction that they undergo with their typical diet. When we compare multiple different communities like the two that I just mentioned, we have come up with a list of factors that may be associated with long-lived populations in general. And they might be what you expect. So as far as diet, eating in moderation, using mostly a plant-based diet, and eating a lighter meal at the end of the day, therefore having a healthy BMI. In particular, long-lived men are typically very lean. Most of these populations have a high level of activity, and not necessarily cardiovascular exercise, but moderate activity such as walking or gardening. And substantial smoking in these populations is rare. In addition, these cultures tend to have components of purposeful living, such as particular life philosophies, work ethics, or volunteerism. And social support systems within these communities tend to be very strong, whether that's between family and friends or church, for example. And some of the communities have a strong culture of humor and laughter. Spirituality tends to be an important component as well. So you may be saying, okay, we've talked a little bit about centenarians and supercentenarians and human lifespan, but wait a minute, why would I want to live to be 100? Wouldn't that mean that I would just be living longer with a disability or an illness? And so let's talk a little bit about that. This graph is showing the typical lifespan, so from birth on the left to death on the very right. And the orange bar is showing a period of disability or illness. So the typical individual would maybe develop one disease in their 50s or 60s, and that disease would carry with them until the end of their life. They may develop multiple diseases within that time frame, but this orange bar is showing that period of time when the individual is possibly incapacitated or limited by their disease or disability. In this case, if we were to extend lifespan so that someone is living longer, but still has the same onset of disease at the same time of their life, this would mean that they would actually live for a longer period of time with that disability or illness. So there's a concept called compression of morbidity, which some folks consider to be the most optimal pattern of a lifespan, in which perhaps the lifespan isn't extended by very much. However, the onset of disease or disability is later in life, so that the person is living without disability or illness for longer during their lifespan. And that's what we call compression of morbidity. Compression of morbidity is actually seen fairly often in centenarians. In fact, some centenarians only fall ill a week or two prior to death. Other things that we notice in centenarians is that approximately 25% of them are cognitively intact at the end of life, which is not so typical in the general population. And that the average onset of cognitive impairment, if it does present, is at 92 years of age. And even centenarians who have biological markers of Alzheimer's disease, for example, may not have a clinical syndrome. Cancer is also typically diagnosed substantially later in centenarians than the general population, as well as vascular disease, which is diagnosed later or not at all. So this is just illustrating the concept of health span, the period of life in which an individual is functioning and without disability or disease. And this is a concept of living better rather than living longer. So if we wanted to extend health span, we would want to delay or prevent the disease onset to later in the lifespan. And typically the medical community focuses on one disease at a time. We research heart disease or diabetes or lung disease. And I'd like to propose that in order to extend health span, perhaps we should be focusing on targeting aging. Aging is the common risk factor for multiple age-related diseases. Therefore, if we were able to target the process of aging itself, we may be able to prevent the onset of disease until later in the lifespan. And in this way, we would be preventing the onset of multiple different diseases at once rather than individually. If we were to take the strategy, how would we target aging itself? So researchers have come up with several fundamental aging mechanisms, processes that occur with aging in model organisms and humans, and that could be good targets for therapeutics. So I've given a couple examples here. If we wanted to target aging, we could remove aged or dysfunctional cells, for example, senescent cells that accumulate with aging and we know are involved in causing diseases. We could try to improve mitochondrial function. We know that mitochondria, which are the energy producers of the cell, are dysfunctional with aging. So by improving their function, perhaps we could improve age-related disease as well. We could focus on rejuvenating stem cells, which replenish tissues with aging. We could try to prevent DNA damage, such as telomere shortening that occurs with cell replication. Or we could try to help cells recycle and maintain the proteins that are the machines of the cell. So these are some very particular ways in which we could target age-related mechanisms to prevent aging-related disease. And in fact, some of these strategies have moved out of the lab and into the translational medicine space and are actually in clinical trials as we speak for conditions such as osteoporosis, lung fibrosis, diabetes, and even COVID-19. So by targeting aging mechanisms, we're trying to impact these diseases. I think it's important to talk a little bit about the societal impact of delaying age-related disease and increasing health span. You can imagine if health span were to be increased in the population, that folks would use fewer healthcare dollars and would save on healthcare costs. And we would also expect for individuals to be able to be more active and contribute to their society and community for longer. So at the conclusion of my talk, I just wanted to give some practical advice from some centenarians that were interviewed. You'll see that as we all know, we're individuals and we don't stop being individuals as we age. So there's some interesting advice here. Andy says that he lived a long life by drinking a vodka martini a day, having no cigarettes and hard work. Margaret says, just be happy and have plenty of cups of tea. And Jesse says, stay away from men. They're just more trouble than they're worth. Florence is focused on attitude and she says, don't take any baloney. Bernice said her secret was no children, less stress, and a daily spoonful of honey. John likes to go ballroom dancing to keep mentally, physically, and spiritually active. And Emma says 3 eggs a day, 2 of them should be raw. So you can pick which one of those you want to take as your advice. So in summary, centenarians are a fairly rare but increasing number. The average but not the maximum human lifespan is increasing over time. Genes and lifestyle both play a role in exceptional longevity. Extending health span may be more beneficial than extending lifespan. And we may have some strategies to do this by targeting aging. And these strategies are now moving into the clinical sphere. And finally, even centenarians themselves cannot agree on the secret to a long life. I hope you enjoyed my talk, and please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments, discussion points at my email here. It's palmer.allison@mayo.edu. Thank you so much for your time and your attention.